CardGamesTV1 Podcast. The game ain't rocket science. It's more like tic-tac-toe. Keep seeing this pattern happen over and over again. People still... the way I look at it realistically, if I think about it, it's not that people don't know no better. It's just that people are choosing to know no better, if that makes sense. Right? They're choosing to deliberately try to sell this false narrative, right, of a certain color is bad. Like, wasn't it not that long ago yellow was bad, and then not that long ago green was bad color, and then now this week black is bad? Apparently black is a bad color. And then of course the reasons for it being bad are not even logical, right? They're not justified. They're a poor excuse. They're a long reach for saying that the color black is bad, considering the fact how generic black is, and it's deliberately meant to be generic so you can splash it in any other deck. So if anything, any deck that has overarm in it has a little black. So saying that the color itself is weak makes no sense. It makes sense to say that black is less popular in this format or something like that. That makes sense to say. Hate when people try to say, like, oh, the color's not good because Bandai this, Bandai that. It's like, you acting like Bandai didn't create new black cards in the new set. The new set has black cards. They didn't skip out making cards for black. There is black leaders. There are black cards. You're just not using them because you're not playing black. Since you're not playing a black deck, of course all these new black cards are useless to you. So it's not that black is bad or black, is not getting love or support, whatever you want to call it. It's y'all, the players, they're choosing not to play black. Y'all choosing to play whatever y'all want to play. And so far, Gamma, here's the funny thing. If Gamma 1 and 2 was black, right? If it was black, which to a certain degree would make a little bit of sense because there are a lot of black Android cards. The Miro stuff. But anyway, the point is if Gamma was black, then it'd be the best black deck in the format. But it's not. They chose to make the leader blue. They chose to make the cards in the deck blue. If they made it black instead, then black will be popular. So they didn't. They made it blue. And they made it essentially Soul Striker 2.0. Notice no one's really rocking Soul Striker right now. Why? Because they got Gamma 1 and 2 as a replacement. So think about that. That's the thing. It's really not about colors. Because if it was about color, or if it was actually about like a certain character, right, a certain specific leader, then that leader, color, whatever, will still be popular. But a lot of times it's just functionality. Right, it's an ability to do something that isn't common. Soul Striker's only value comes from untapped energy. You take that ability away, he's trash. Common sense, right? Gamma 1 and 2 take away the ability to have 3 energy in active mode during your opponent's turn. The leader will be trash. People will be complaining about the leader's mid, average at best. It's only because of one small detail is what makes a card good in some people's eyes. Just one small detail. But a lot of people try to act like it's bigger. It's more complicated than that. They try to complicate, rocket science, right? They try to make it seem like it's very complicated. That only a select few can understand the value of certain cards. It's like, no. It doesn't take a genius to see value in a leader that untaps energy. That's a noob. Somebody who just started playing the game yesterday can see the value in that. You don't need to be an expert. You don't have to be playing the game since set 1 to see the value in untapping energy. Right? It doesn't take you playing from set 1 or even have experience playing many other card games, have over 20 years of card game experience to see the value in in a card that draws or a card that board wipes or anything like that. Like, it doesn't take genius level intellect to notice these things, to see the value in these things. These are blatantly obvious things. That's the point. It's obvious. And if it's obvious, it's simple. And if it's simple, it ain't rocket science. A lot of people try to act like the game is a game of chess. Like, this card game is a game of chess, or most card games, like, it's a game of chess. Try to make it more complicated than it really is. It's like, no, it's not that complicated. It's least complicated. As a player, you're supposed to make the game simpler. You're not supposed to make the game complicated. You're not supposed to be jumping through a whole bunch of hoops just to do something, right? You're supposed to be able to tell, when something's worth playing versus something that's not worth playing. Because something that's worth playing is easy to play. Now, I like to, play difficult strategies, do things that, take a lot of time and effort to achieve, just because I like a challenge. But logically, when the goal is to win, you want the quickest, easiest route, right? You want the route of less resistance, right? You want to take the easiest path possible. Especially as a competitive player, I expect to see that. I expect to see more competitive players, do that. That's supposed to be a normal standard among competitive players, is that they prefer everything to be easy and streamlined and straightforward, so they don't try to do any of the, what some people call gimmick, right? Try to play some type of elaborate combo or strategy to try to win a game, when they'll just simplify and just, shrink it down to a basic strategy. First 4 damage, next 2 requires a little effort, the last 2 is hardest type stuff, and just break the game down to the simplest form. That's what I try to do. I try to simplify the game, for those who like to complicate, because some people think the game's complicated, and part of it is because they're constantly being told how difficult and complicated it is. That you got people out here trying to tell you how to play the game, but the way they tell you is in a way that makes it sound hard and difficult. I be seeing people, videos, but also be seeing people in the comment section, literally like agreeing or, repeating what they heard in the video that they saw as if it's the truth. And it's like, nah, that's somebody's point of view or somebody's opinion. That's not a fact. That's not a reality. So you got people being influenced to believe something that ain't really true. Like, believe a certain color isn't good just because it's not a popular color right now. So they think, oh yeah, the color's not good because, such and such. And it's like, but that's not the case. The color is good. It's just the players aren't. The players aren't good, right? They're not putting in the effort to play something. I've said this before, one of my other podcasts, or maybe one of my masterclass, where every deck's the same. An aggro deck is an aggro deck regardless of color. A hand control deck is a hand control deck regardless of color. A mill deck is a mill deck regardless of color. Color is not the determining factor if a deck wins or not, right? It's the strategies that you're using and how consistent the strategy is in achieving your goal is what determines if a deck wins or not. This is why we keep promoting the idea of players being good at the game, more so, the ones who are, us who are promoting the idea that players need to get good at the game, so that way they're not constantly chasing the quote-unquote best deck in the format, because it's not about the deck ever. It's about the players. The reason why most decks, top and are considered the best deck is because of over-representation. That means a lot of people are using the deck, therefore it looks like it's the best deck, just because a lot of people are using it. If one person, like, the way a deck is really good, if one person took the deck to like a 100-man tournament, right, and won the event, it's like, damn, only one person played that one deck and topped the whole event. They beat everyone else, that they played against to get to first place. That's how that's the best deck, right? If you want to talk about like decks, capability of doing things, that would be the best deck. It wouldn't be top 8 shouldn't consist of four of the same deck. That just shows that it's overrepresentation, which means by over majority popularity of the deck being played, yeah, you're going to see a lot of top cuts having, top eights having a whole bunch of the same deck. It's not because it's the best deck, it's because there's too many people playing it, so of course you're going to have a whole bunch of people up there, right? And then what adds to it is the players, right? The players who play it. Some players are just, regardless of what deck they play, they're going to be good with it. So, of course, if they play a deck that everybody else is playing, of course they're going to do good. One, because they're a good player. It's not the deck, it's them, the player. The deck is just is just coming along for the ride, right? The deck is benefiting from that good player playing it. And that's it. It's not the other way around. The player's not benefiting from the deck. The deck's benefiting from the player. In Yu-Gi-Oh! I see that a lot, that a deck only really was topping, like when it wasn't overrepresented, obviously. Largely was, most on average, was because of the side deck. I made like a video a long time ago about the best deck in any format is the side deck. And that still holds true and applies even to Dragon Ball Super, because, Dragon Ball Super does have a side deck. This is part of why one of the main reasons I don't agree with side deck being part of a card game, especially for, competitive play. That's why, I personally don't side deck. Proof of what's good is that whatever you build, you could play it consistently, back to back, multiple duels, as is, and do good. The deck's not good if you have to side deck. If you have a side deck, your deck's trash. That's just my viewpoint. To each their own. People will disagree, obviously, but that is the truth. That's the reality I've seen. That if you need a side deck, your deck's trash. Because side deck does not exist to make the game fair and balanced and give your opponent a fighting chance against your deck. No, we all know that's not what a side deck's for. Side deck is to give you the upper hand, the unfair advantage, or whatever you want to call it. It's meant to give you the ability to beat your opponent. It's essentially like letting Batman have kryptonite against Superman. It's like, instead of them fighting with what they naturally have, Batman gets to have kryptonite. That's essentially what side deck is. You just get to have the weakness of your opponent, of your opponent's deck. That's it. A side deck is not about balance. It's about offsetting, the obvious situation that your deck is trash. Because if your deck is good and your deck is so-called, quote-unquote, the best deck in the format, it shouldn't need a side deck. I always thought that was a weird thing. The concept, people talking about, oh, this deck is tier 1 or tier 0. This deck is the best deck in the format, blah, 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 blah. Yet it still has a side deck. And it's like, how is it the best when it still has a side deck? If anything, I should see the opposite. The best decks in the format should not have a side deck, because they are the best deck in the format. So they don't need anything extra other than what's already in the main deck. And then every other deck that's trash compared to the best deck in the format need a side deck to give them a fighting chance against the best deck in the format. That's what I should be seeing. But why are we seeing the so-called best decks in the format have side decks? That don't make no sense to me. All right? Make that make sense. Further proving is like, yeah, the game is not rocket science. Either is the meta, and, it was funny to hear a lot of people talking about they were surprised to see, what decks were topping in the last regional, or what people were playing. And it's like, that's not a surprise. Any deck is viable, any deck is playable. It's just a matter of, does the player want to play the deck? What does the player want to do? Somebody was playing Boma, they topped the regional, they won the event with Boma, and the main reason why is because they had a very defensive deck in the best of one, game. So obviously being very defensive is very useful in best of one, because that just means you don't die by turn 4. That means you last longer. So good for the grind game, good for prolonging the match. And the match is shorter time because it's just best of one. So having a deck that, can help you stay in the game longer, so time can run out. You can win in time. You can win because your opponent decked out, or you can win because you knocked your opponent out. Those are the 3 most common ways you're going to win, especially competitively. You're going to win because of timeout. You're going to win because of knockout, or you're going to win because of deck out. Those are the 3 things you got to deal with when you play competitive. You know, I've had that scenario happen to me, where I was going for game, but time ran out and I lost. Even though I was going for game, I was in the winning position, but time ran out and I lost. So these are the kind of things you gotta deal with. You gotta understand how these, how it works, right? How you can knock your opponent out of, by dealing them 8 damage. How you can deck your opponent out. How you can, use up the time that y'all have for the match to end in your favor. Like, these are the things you got to learn and understand, but they're not that complicated. Like I said, not rocket science. It's simple. You just got to find cards that you can use to help you achieve these things. There's a couple cards that I'm gonna make a video eventually where I'm just gonna showcase a couple of like cards that mill and have that as a it's like here's some cards you could tech in, whether you main deck it or side deck, doesn't matter, right? That can help you mill your opponent. I mean, if you're playing best of one side, so clearly you can always side deck, or, you can side deck it in. It doesn't have to be a main deck card, but having mill cards in your side or main gives you the ability to have that backup strategy to win through deck out if you can't do it through knockout or timeout. At least try to incorporate some mill. It's good if you can incorporate some hand control, because that will help reduce your opponent's ability to out hand size you, right? Out resource you, so that way you have a chance to at least try to go for knockout. Most often, our goal as players is the knockout, right? It's dealing our opponent 8 damage and winning that way. But that gets harder the faster your opponent can draw cards. All these free negates and stuff like that, and other factors they have to take into account. Blocker unisons, or just blockers in general. Things like that, obviously get in the way. So it's going to be harder to deal the last 2 damage, like I always say. So you need some type of alternative way of, finishing out the game, whether it's timing your opponent out, by making sure their life is lower than yours, or, decking them out. That's the point we're getting to. We're just getting to that simple three-way win strategy. And now you just got to incorporate all that into one deck, or into all your decks. That way, regardless of what happens, regardless of your matchups, in some shape, way, or form, as long as you're paying attention to the situation, pay attention to the board state, pay attention to the time if you're at a tournament, right? Your ability to win will be higher if you're aware of the situation. If you're aware that right now is the best time to go for game, or you're aware that you could deck your opponent is going to deck out in a couple turns, you might want to just keep your defenses up instead of trying to knock them out, which can put you in a bad situation, because you might end up tapping out and end up in a clapback scenario. Or you put out attackers to attack your opponent, and they end up blocking the attacks, right? Stopping your attacks. But since you put out attackers, not blockers, right? Or defenders, or defense cards, now your opponent swings back at you, and if time runs out and you have less life than them, they can end up winning just because of that, just because you didn't defend your life. Especially if you're in a position where you have more life than your opponent and time is running out, you might not want to try to go in for damage. You already have more life than your opponent. What you need to do is maintain your defense, right? Keep your defenses up so you can keep your life up, so you can just win in that, right? This is not the typical thing, right? This is not the thing that, like I said, most players plan to do or try to do. Our main goal is always to do 8 damage because that's just the basic aspect of the game is doing 8 damage. But since we have other ways of winning in time, winning through deck out, right? Gotta take advantage of it, right? You definitely don't want to lose because you decked out. You definitely don't want to lose because time ran out. You had less life than your opponent, and the only reason you have less life is because you activated your leader's effect, or you played a sparking negate or something, and that caused you to lose life, obviously, and then you just lost because you tried not to take double strike or triple strike down. You trying not to lose causes you to lose. Think about the irony in that, right? You trying not to lose by playing a card to negate an attack is the reason you lost, right? More reason why you want to keep your energy up, so you can play your your negates and stuff, like your sparking negates, for example, without taking a life. Just play it by actually tapping energy. I was I just did a gameplay where I ended up in that scenario. I had 3 life, my opponent had 3 life. They had 19 cards in the deck. I had 20 cards in my deck, and my opponent was trying to go for game. And of course I'm playing set to Zamasu, so it's just a matter of me taking enough damage to awaken. And I was at 3 life, so I just need to take 1 damage or 2 damage and I can awaken. So all I have to do is stop his triple strike attack, which I did, but for some reason my opponent didn't realize that I negated the attack and tried to combo into it, hoping that he can win off of a triple strike attack. And it's like, no, I negated that attack. So right now all you have is your double strike unison attack and your leader swing, right? But I had enough to stop both attacks. So I was able to stop the leader swing, which I actually shouldn't have. When I think of, obviously logically, I should have just taken it because I could afford to take it. That's the thing. Well, that's what it was. We were running out of time, so that's why I had to negate all the attack. I'm thinking like I shouldn't have stopped it. I'm playing Zamasu set 2. It's like, oh, that's why, because of time. That's the importance. See, if time wasn't a factor, or if I had more time, then yes, I would have, just taken the damage so that way I can awaken and just increase my hand size, right? And then next turn, Mirror Creator absorbed my opponent for game, because that's one of the cards I had. That's why I ended up paying 1 energy to out combo his leader swing, because he attacked the leader just for 15k. I'm like, all right, I can out combo that with Mirror, and then negate the double strike attack from his unison, because he had the Jiren unison, and I could stop that with a negate and still have a body on board, to use offensively or whatever. But and then of course on my turn I can awaken by using my leader's effect, but I would have to have the extra time. Point was, the time ran out. 30 minutes. The time ran out, and it's like, all right, we both 3 life, but I have more cards than you. So if the game is going to be determined by some metric, by some measure, since we both have the same life, you can't use that as a measure. So we have to measure something else, and deck size can be used as a measurement. So since I have 1 card more than my opponent, that could be the measure, right? And what's ironic, obviously I play a 60 card Zamasu deck, so my opponent was playing Cooler Mill, and he milled me a lot, but because I'm playing a 60 card deck, I still ended up having more cards in my deck than he did. That's why I had 1 card more than he did. So the irony in that I could just win by just that, that situation. So I actually don't know how to determine, best of 1. Oh, I think what they'll probably do is give you 5 more minutes. I think that's what it was. 5 more minutes. That's what they would have done. I should keep that in mind. Add that to to the video series, right? Add the 5 more minutes. If 30 minutes, if I hit 30 minutes, but the game ends, is technically a tie, because we both have the same life, then I will just add 5 more minutes to the clock, as it were. And I'll just keep recording 5 minutes longer and play out and see what happens. That's what I should do. Yeah, 5 more minutes. Yeah, it's the overtime thing. So that's probably what they do. Yeah. Anyway, learning, right? Learning the competitive landscape, as they say. But I'm still, flabbergasted, as they say, of how a lot of the players that are outspoken, right? The ones who make videos, the ones that's out there making posts and stuff like that, how they're outspoken with the idea of like trying to make the game sound more complex than it really is, so that way they can sound, I'm gonna say, so that way they can sound cooler, that way they can sound so skillful when they're doing the bare minimum, right? When they're doing basic stuff, they're not doing great, amazing things. It's like, all right, good, you're winning, good for you, but it's probably not because of like some creative, spicy tech or something that you're winning at the most basic level, right? There's a possibility that your opponent doesn't know what they're doing, so you got the advantage just because you have more experience in the game than they do. So that's why you won, because they're less experienced, or they made a misplay and that benefited you, or you did something that you're not supposed to do, like you played a card you weren't supposed to be able to play because you didn't meet the conditions. Like, let's say you have one marker on a blue unison, right? And you God Seal trunks your opponent's, battle card. And that is the reason you won, because you're able, they tapped out to play it, you God Sealed, and now on your turn, you're just gonna swing in for game, and they're tapped out, so it'll be hard for them to defend, and they probably have a low hand size. So you're gonna take advantage of that. But in reality, if somebody was paying attention, they would have realized you couldn't God Seal because you have one marker on the unison, not 2. And you need 2 or more markers in order to play God Seal for free. So stuff like that matters. Or maybe you tap the wrong energy to play a card. So in reality, you actually couldn't play the card because you tapped the wrong energy for it. Or let's say you just didn't have the right energy, but somehow you overlooked the fact that you needed a specific amount of like blue energy or something, or yellow energy to play a card, and you actually played it with different energy. And now, since your opponent wasn't paying attention, as well as you weren't paying attention, you end up playing something you actually would not be able to play. I've seen a scenario where somebody tried to play a Sparking Negate, when they only have 4 cards in their drop, or 3 cards, because they weren't paying attention to their drop. And they realized, oh shit, I can't play it. So that was a big deal, right? If they knew they didn't have enough for the Sparking Negate, they would have made sure that they comboed to guarantee there's enough for the Sparking Negate, so that way the Sparking Negate can be useful. But they weren't paying attention, and now they're in a bad situation. So stuff like that can benefit you, just like stuff like that can hurt you if you're not paying attention to your drop area. You might end up trying to play a Sparking Negate when you couldn't. And let's say you did play the Sparking Negate when you only have 4 cards in your drop, and your opponent didn't notice, and you didn't notice, and you end up winning because of it. All right? You end up surviving, because let's say their attack was like a quadruple strike. So then you're like, oh, Sparking Negate, I'll take 1 damage instead of 4. But in reality, you're not supposed to be able to play the Sparking Negate because you don't have 5 cards in your drop. So you actually would have taken 4 damage and lost. You know what I mean? Stuff like that's important. That's why it's important to pay attention to the board state. Make sure that everybody's doing what they're supposed to do and doing what they're allowed to do based off of the card mechanics. Like I said, the game is not complicated, so people shouldn't be making that many mistakes when they're playing. And if mistakes are happening a lot, it's probably because people are playing cards that have so many effects on the card that makes the game, that makes it where they could accidentally misplay, right? They could play a card that has like three sentence worth of text, right? Three lines worth of text, and the last line says that they can't play something. Like, let's say it can't play battle cards, but for some reason they start playing a whole bunch of battle cards after they play that card, not realizing that the card they played actually prevents them from playing more battle cards. But they still play more battle cards and take advantage of the situation of having a whole bunch of battle cards they can swing with. But in reality, they shouldn't have that. So that type of stuff makes the game more complicated. Just like, the other stuff I mentioned before about playing cards where you search. Oh, let me look at the top 7 cards of my deck. It's like, okay, take your time looking at the top 7 cards of your deck, picking a card, putting the cards back, shuffling, handing me your deck so I can cut it, me handing the deck back to you. Let's spend time doing all of that when you could have just played something that draws a card and keep it moving, right? Be faster, efficient. Speed is a factor. It's important, but wouldn't be too surprised that the reason why most people do play like the 1-drops that lets them look at the top of the deck to search out a card. The real reason they do it is because of that. Is that it slows down the game. It takes time to do that, So be it. If that's their strategy, to spend as much time doing things on their turn, so that way their opponent has less time on their turn. If that's their strategy, then that's their strategy, and that's what time matches promote. They promote the idea of time wasting, right? It's all about time management and the fact that your opponent can literally try to manage time so they have more time than you do, more turns than you because they took longer on their turns than you. That's an unfortunate scenario. Granted, you could do the same, right? You could take long to play your turns, but then that just creates a toxic game state because y'all are literally just making plays and moves and decisions based off of just wasting time instead of actually playing out the match, right? Instead of playing out the game, instead of trying to race to the finish line, right? To the end of the game, to the outcome of who wins. How busy trying to prolong the game so that way y'all win more by luck than by skill. So that's the unfortunateness. Skill matters. I'm a fan of the idea of skill. Skill should matter more, but randomness is a factor. The fact that your opponent could play in such a way that benefits them, so that way you don't have as much time doing the things you want to do on your turn, make the plays you want to play, get to the turn that you need, especially if your win con is like a 5-drop or something. You need to get to turn 5 to use it. Or if you have a turn 7 win con, you need to get to turn 7. And if you and your opponent are taking too long to get to that point, no surprise if you don't get to play the card because y'all took too long. So that's the kind of stuff that I be seeing. But like I said, man, the game is not difficult. It's not rocket science. But there's going to be a lot of people out there that's going to make it seem like it is. They're going to try to act like it is. That they want you to believe that it's super, super difficult. That's the funny thing. I talk about mastering the game, but it's not mastering because the game is hard. No, mastering because the game is simple. The idea is just for me to understand the game in its entirety, right? Understand the different aspects of the game and understand why it's so simple, right? In general, mastering something is not about understanding the complexity of something. It's about understanding that it's simple. And then why everybody else thinks it's complicated, you're the one who realizes it's simple. This is why most people who are really good at something, it looks effortless. It looks like it's easy for them to do. And it's because it is easy. Because they understand what it takes for something to be easy. So of course it's easy for them. But for everybody else, things are complicated because they don't understand. And that's the thing. Not everyone has the same level of intellect. Not everyone has the same knowledge or experience. So of course, no surprise when you have people of different views, different opinions, right? That's why you have people, try to make the game sound more complicated than it really is. And you got some people like myself who's like, no, it's simple. It's here's what you need to know. The first 4 damage is the easiest. Next 2 require a little effort. Last 2 is the hardest. So in reality, you're focused. When you build a deck, you're focusing on dealing the last 2 damage, figuring out a strategy that will help you deal the last 2 damage. Whether it's burn, or it's attacking for the damage, or alternative win cons like decking your opponent out, winning in time, or an auto win con effect, an effect that says you win just because you achieved this condition. You know what I mean? And that's it. It boils down to that simplicity. But a lot of people try to make it complicated. They try to make it seem like, nah, the game is about like 3 drops and 2 drops and this 7 drop, like the importance of this 7 drop and this 6 drop over here. Having these ratios, you gotta have like 2 copies of this card, 2 copies of that card. That changes, the outcome of the games and blah blah blah. It's like, no, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. That's mind games. You're tricking yourself into thinking that that's valuable, thinking that splitting up your ratios into different numbers is going to increase the likelihood of you winning. It actually does not. Having more copies of the same thing is what mathematically increases your chances of winning with that win con or with that strategy. Like if you have a specific outcome you want, having multiple copies that achieve that outcome is what's going to get you that outcome. So, like for example, the Death and Tactics strategy I have multiple cards in the Death and Tactics strategy where they do the same thing. I have a 3-drop that burns you if you play a counter skill. I have a 4-drop that burns you if you play a counter skill. I have 2 cards that do the same thing. They have the same attack power. They're both 20Ks, but one costs 3, the other one costs 4. They're essentially the same card, just one costs 1 more than another, which means turn 3 I could play the 3-drop and turn 4 I could play the 4-drop. Okay. They both have the same effect. Logically, if I have to choose one of the 2 because I don't have space in my deck to put both of them, then obviously I'll pick the 3-drop because it's cheaper. I could play it on turn 3 for 3, or I could play on turn 4 for 3 and still have 1 energy up for like a negate or something, or a champa. So I can, double strike somebody for game, or drop Mirror Creator Absorb for 1 energy, right? And swing at my opponent, and then if my opponent plays a negate, bang, burn you, If my opponent tries to drop Cast Magnetism and Frieza on my Mirror Creator Absorb, for example, boom, burn you, you know what I mean? So, that kind of stuff is simplicity. But the thing is, the irony is a lot of people try to make things out to be way more complicated than they really should be. While I keep trying to make the game easier and easier and easier. That's why I was doing the Boma burn thing. It's like, okay, Boma, puts up defense. People like the idea of, being able to block attacks here and there. And their main focus was to draw a lot of cards and, double strike and dump their whole hand into the attack and go for game. That's cool and all, but it's like, but that's not always going to be reliable. That's not always going to happen. So let's come up with an alternative. Since the deck is really good at, defending, so it's really good at getting to late game, why not find some alternative late game win cons, right? Instead of trying to rely on the whole dumping your whole hand into an attack strategy, why not have a burn strategy, right? So that's what I started doing, started putting burn into Boma and created Boma burn. And, obviously a lot of other people like the idea, so they've been using it, even though they probably won't give me credit for it. But anyway, stuff like that. Even Even the idea of like trying to incorporate mill, even playing colors other than black in Hat Chat, for example, is a way of doing things differently. It's like, okay, let's take advantage of this leader's floodgate ability, permanent, right? His floodgate ability, and its defensive capabilities, and then since we can, stay in the game longer, we can draw out the game. The likelihood of decking somebody out is very high. I've been in scenarios where my opponent was like drastically, low on cards in their deck, playing against Hatch. They were too busy drawing, and trying to find cards to try to, kill me with. And I'm constantly blocking, defending, removing their threats, forcing them to have to keep drawing and trying to draw into more threats, trying to draw into more things that they could try to use to win. But since my defense is strong, my iron defense, eventually they're going to get to a point where they're going to run out of gas, as they say. So that's essentially what decking out is running out of gas. So if you can defend long enough for your opponent to run out of gas, run out of cards they can draw from their deck, you'll win. Don't want to drag out this podcast for too long. I'm obviously getting tired. But just remember, man, this game is not hard. At least it's not as hard as you think it is, or as hard as you clearly make it out to be. And tons of people out there definitely try to make it out to be harder than it really is, and it's not that hard. Like, it really does be feeling weird that some people are really trying to make it seem like the game is difficult. And it's like, no, the game ain't that difficult. It's relatively easy. You just got to practice these different ways of winning, right? Time out, knockout, and deck out. Master those three, right? Get used to, consistently achieving one of those three outcomes. Whether you win because you have more life than your opponent, or you win because your opponent ran out of cards, or you win because you dealt 8 damage. Whichever outcome comes first, as they say. Whichever outcome comes first is the one that you'll be winning with. If you're really good at making your opponent deck out, then that's your win con, right? That's your go-to strategy. If you're good at knocking people out, then hey, go that route till you stay on. If you're good at timing people out, right? You're good at winning in time. You're good at keeping your life high while your opponent's drastically reducing their life because of their card effects or their leader awaken ability, or what they have to take life in order to awaken early, whatever they're doing to make their life go lower, but you're constantly defending your life and keeping your guard up, as they say. Then if you're really good at that, then take advantage of it. That's the thing. It's like, if you're good at dealing damage, then that's your thing. If you're good at defending your life, that's your thing. You know what I mean? If you're good at time management, then that's your thing. So find out what's your thing and master it, use it, and the game will be so much easier, because it's definitely not that complicated. You just got to understand what works best for you, and that's what makes the game really, really easy. Stop making it difficult because you're more of a, let's say, more of a defense player, but you're trying to play aggro, or you're more of a control player, but you keep trying to play mill. And that don't make no sense. Play what best suits you. If you're a good aggro player, then that's what you should be doing. You should be playing aggro instead of trying to play control, or hand control, or mill, or some type of wombo combo, win con, like where you tap 16 energy and you win. Like, instead of doing that, if you're really good at aggro, then that's should be the way you play aggro and win, and just get your W's that way. Make the game easier for yourself, not harder, by trying to do the opposite of what you're naturally good at. And that's the end of the video.